investors can't see you," Dad hissed. "Take the service elevator." "You're the family failure, use the service elevator," Dad said. My brother smirked, then raised a glass upstairs to their $2.4 million rescue, announcing himself as the company's future CEO. I took the elevator without arguing. Minutes later, the banker crossed the ballroom, past my father and brother, and placed the contract in front of me. "Harbor North needs your final approval, Ms. Mercer." I opened the document to the marked page and smiled. Read Clause 11. They expected a signature releasing the money. Instead, that clause exposed $612,000 they had taken, and the price of saving 118 jobs was removing them both from power. Before I dive into the story, hit like and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Tell me whether you'd sign Clause 11 to save 118 paychecks. Even if it meant removing your own father and brother from power, your answer will tell me whether I was cruel or finally fair. 12 years earlier, I still believed numbers could protect me if I explained them clearly enough. My name is Sabine Mercer. At 28, I was the financial planning manager at Mercer Architectural Millwork, the company my father, Harlan, had built from a rented shop into a manufacturer with more than 100 employees. My younger brother, Pierce, ran sales. He was charming, confident, and very good at making a contract look profitable before anyone calculated what it would cost to fulfill. When he landed the largest hotel project in our history, the family celebrated before the ink was dry. I reviewed the bid that night. The price did not cover installation. Material escalation was capped against us. The client could demand design changes without paying enough for them. And Pierce had granted a payment schedule that left us carrying the job for months. I projected a loss of nearly $386,000. Pierce leaned back in his chair when I showed him. "Sabine understands spreadsheets," he said. "I understand customers." Dad chose the version of the truth that sounded more impressive. He ordered production to begin. The job went exactly where the numbers said it would. Change orders multiplied. Lumber costs rose. The client delayed payment. By completion, we had lost almost the exact amount I predicted. Pierce blamed finance for failing to control the budget. Dad placed a report in front of me and told me to sign it. The report said I had underestimated costs and failed to warn management. Both statements were false. "I warned you before the contract was signed," I said. Dad's expression hardened. "You understand numbers, but you don't understand business." I refused to sign by the end of the week. I had resigned. My family told everyone I had abandoned the company under pressure. Pierce began calling me the family failure, and Dad never corrected him. I started over as a restructuring analyst, working on failing factories, broken loan agreements, and payroll crises no one wanted to admit existed over the next 12 years. I helped save companies from liquidation and eventually co-founded Harbor North Capital. My family reduced all of that to one sentence. Sabine does paperwork for lenders. Then an emergency financing file reached my desk. The borrower's name was Mercer Architectural Millwork. The file showed a company that was not dead yet, but close enough to hear the machinery stopping. Mercer Architectural Millwork needed exactly $2,400,000. $1,100,000 would clear the revolving loan and bank fees. $640,000 would go to overdue suppliers. $410,000 would cover payroll taxes and penalties. The final $250,000 would fund 13 weeks of controlled operations. Without it, first, Keystone could freeze the credit line. Vendors could stop shipping wood. Payroll would fail after one more cycle. 118 employees were standing between my family's pride and unemployment. The public explanation blamed rising lumber costs, delayed projects, and a slow-paying client. Those problems were real. They were not the whole truth. Pierce had opened an expensive showroom that never produced enough sales. He financed long-term equipment with short-term debt, accepted low-margin contracts to inflate revenue, and allowed customers months to pay. The file also showed executive advances and unusual transfers to related companies. Because the borrower was my family's business, I disclosed everything to Harbor North before reading further. I did not underwrite the loan. I did not vote on it. I did not direct the forensic review or set the interest rate. Petra Lang led an independent investment committee. Outside counsel reviewed every condition, and a separate forensic accountant traced the company's cash. Their conclusion was difficult but clear. The business could survive. It still had valuable equipment, skilled workers, long-term customers, and enough profitable orders to recover under disciplined management. What it could not survive was another rescue controlled by the same people who had created the emergency. Harbor North agreed to consider the full $2.4 million, subject to strict management conditions. Dad and Pierce knew a new lender was reviewing the company. They did not know I was a managing partner authorized to sign the final facility. Dad scheduled an investor dinner before the deal had closed. He planned to reassure suppliers, announce Pierce as the future CEO, and describe the crisis as temporary pressure already solved by family leadership. Mom insisted I be invited. Pierce laughed when he heard. "Let her come," he told Dad. "We'll seat her in the back where she can't embarrass us." They were preparing to celebrate money they did not yet have, and none of them had read what that money would cost. I arrived at the private club 10 minutes early in a navy suit, carrying the same worn leather case I had used as a junior analyst. Pierce saw me first. "This isn't one of your bank cubicles," he said, glancing at my shoes. "Try not to look nervous." Investors and suppliers were crossing the marble lobby behind him. Dad stepped between us and pulled me toward a narrow corridor beside the freight doors. "Our investors can't see you," Dad hissed. "Take the service elevator." I looked at him. "You invited me here to hide me. Your brother is announcing the future of this company. Tonight is not about your feelings." Then he delivered the sentence he had used for 12 years. "You're the family failure, use the service elevator," Dad said. Mom stood a few feet away and stared at the carpet. Pierce smiled. "Don't ruin the rescue because you still resent us." I entered the elevator without answering. Dad thought he had sent me away from the important room. Instead, the service elevator opened directly beside the private closing suite on the 12th floor. Miles Kearney from First Keystone was waiting with outside counsel and the final credit package. On the table sat the forensic report. $612,000 had left the company through insider transactions. Pierce had used $274,000 to fund a lake house through an LLC called Mercer Client Retreats. No client had ever stayed there. Company money had also paid for luxury vehicle leases, club memberships, personal travel, executive advances, and renovations that ended up in private homes. Dad had approved enough of those expenses to know they were not mistakes. He had called them temporary family use. The marked section in the contract was Clause 11. It required Dad to resign as CEO and surrender signing authority. Pierce would lose financial control and his promised promotion. An independent turnaround CEO and CFO would manage the business. Every insider withdrawal had to be repaid. The lake house had to be sold or refinanced personally. Loan proceeds could only reach payroll, taxes, approved suppliers, and working capital. The clause also stated that I would receive no shares, board seat, or personal fee. This was not a takeover. It was a locked door between new money and the people who had emptied the old accounts. Miles asked, "Have they acknowledged the final conditions?" Counsel turned her laptop toward me. Pierce had opened the email that afternoon. He had never replied. Through the wall, his voice rose from the ballroom. "Tonight, I'm proud to announce that our family remains in control." I closed the report. They had read Clause 11. They were simply betting that once the room applauded, no lender would dare make them accept it. My brother raised a glass to their $2.4 million rescue. "Tonight proves that real leadership protects a family legacy," Pierce said from the stage. "Mercer architectural millwork is secure, our workforce is protected, and I'm honored to continue what Dad built as the company's next CEO." Applause moved through the ballroom. Dad stood beside him, smiling as though the loan had already closed. He thanked First Keystone and our new financing partners, then praised Pierce for guiding the company through temporary pressure. Not one word about the unpaid taxes. Not one word about the lake house. Not one word about Clause 11. I sat at the back table exactly where they had wanted me. Then Miles Kearney walked toward the stage carrying the contract. Dad reached for it. Miles passed him. The banker placed the contract in front of me. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "Harbor North's final approval is required before First Keystone releases its liens." The applause died. Pierce stared at me. "Why would Sabine approve anything?" Miles answered before I could. "Because Ms. Mercer is the managing partner authorized to execute the facility." Dad's face tightened. "You work for the lender, I lead it." Pierce laughed. "But there was no confidence left in it. So this was you. You bought our debt to take the company. I disclosed our relationship before underwriting began. I did not vote on the loan, direct the forensic review, or write the conditions. I received no shares, board seat, or management role. You expect anyone to believe that outside counsel stepped forward. The investment committee approved every condition independently." Dad pointed at the signature line. "Then sign it and stay out of our operations." I opened the contract to the marked page. I smiled, read Clause 11. Miles began. Harlan Mercer would resign as CEO and surrender signing authority. Pierce Mercer would lose financial control and would not become chief executive during the restructuring. An independent CEO and CFO would oversee operations. The room shifted when Miles reached the insider transactions. $612,000 had to be repaid. Pierce stood. That money was temporary. "Then why did the employees finance your lake house?" "It was a client retreat. Name one client who stayed there." He said nothing. Miles continued. "The lake house had to be sold or refinanced personally. Loan proceeds could go only to payroll, taxes, approved suppliers, and controlled working capital. No family member could receive funds directly." Dad's voice dropped. "You are humiliating this family in front of investors. You called me the family failure before asking me to save the company. We did not ask you. You asked Harbor North for $2.4 million. You just never cared enough to learn who led it." Pierce jabbed a finger toward the contract. "That is our company. I am not taking your company. I am refusing to fund the people who emptied it." Dad looked at Miles. "Remove Clause 11. Miles shook his head. "The committee approved the facility with these conditions." Dad turned back to me. "You can make an exception." "No, without Clause 11 there is no loan. Family does not remove family from its own business. Family does not use 118 paychecks to protect one son's lifestyle." Pierce's face reddened. "You're enjoying this." "No, I am documenting it. You have wanted revenge since you left." I looked at both of them. "You called me the family failure when you thought I had nothing you needed. The moment your company required my signature, you called my boundaries revenge." Dad pushed the contract away. "I will not resign from the company I built. Then do not take the loan." Silence settled over the ballroom. I explained the choices clearly. If they signed Clause 11, Harbor North would fund payroll, taxes, suppliers, and working capital. The company would keep operating while independent management repaired it. Dad and Pierce would repay what they had taken if they refused. Harbor North would walk away. First Keystone would keep its liens, and they could search for another lender. Pierce lifted his chin. "No lender tells a Mercer how to run a Mercer company." I closed the contract. "Then find one willing to finance what you did." I left the pen on the table. For the first time that night, no one applauded. Dad left the ballroom without signing. Pierce followed him, promising everyone the conditions were a negotiating tactic and that another lender would fund the company within a day. He was wrong. Over the next 48 hours, 3 lenders reviewed the same numbers and declined. First Keystone prepared to freeze the revolving line. Our largest supplier stopped releasing lumber without payment. A hospital client demanded proof that Mercer could finish its contract. The company had enough cash for one more payroll. Mom called me that evening. "Your father is scared," she said. "You could show him mercy. Mercy for you cannot mean another missed paycheck for everyone else. Remove the resignation requirement. Handle the rest privately." Privately is how $612,000 disappeared. She went quiet. Dad returned to the conference table the next afternoon. He looked older without the ballroom lights and applause. "I built this company," he said, "and you still own your shares." He stared at the resignation document. "What I lose is control. What you lose is unrestricted access to money that belongs to the business," he signed. The board resolution came next. Then the controlled disbursement agreement and the repayment plan. Pierce refused longer. He said selling the lake house would destroy his family. Dana Whitcomb, the turnaround CEO selected by the independent committee, asked him one question: what happens to the families of 118 employees if payroll fails Friday? Pierce finally signed after midnight. I signed last. I did not sign to save Dad from embarrassment. I signed to stop his embarrassment from becoming everyone else's unemployment. Harbor North released the money in controlled stages. Payroll cleared first, then payroll taxes, insurance, critical suppliers, and materials for profitable contracts. No money went to Dad or Pierce. Dana closed the losing showroom, renegotiated 2 bad contracts, sold unused equipment, and restored purchasing controls. Victor Huang became interim CFO and reviewed every expense above $10,000. Dad lost signing authority and served as an advisor for 6 months before retiring. He sold an investment property to begin repaying the insider withdrawals. Pierce sold the lake house within 120 days. The proceeds returned money to the company. He remained sales director under supervision, but resigned 4 months later because he refused to operate under rules that applied to everyone. He told relatives I had forced him out. The truth was simpler. I had offered him a place without special access, and he chose to leave. 9 months after closing, Mercer met its first covenant. Suppliers were current, margins had improved, and the employee profit-sharing plan restarted after the first profitable year. Mom eventually read the entire forensic report. "I should have stopped your father in the lobby," she told me. "You should have stopped him 12 years ago. We did not reconcile overnight." I kept my distance from Dad and refused every family dinner where Pierce planned to call accountability betrayal. Then, Reena Patel, the payroll supervisor who had worked at Mercer for 22 years, sent me a forward email. Payroll cleared. All 118. That was the first moment the rescue felt real. Not when Dad lost his office, not when Pierce sold the lake house. When 118 people were paid for work they had already done. 1 year later, Dad met me outside the factory. "You took my company from me." "No," I said. "You still own your shares." "What you lost was access to everyone else's money," Mom asked. "Will you come to dinner now?" "Not while Pierce calls accountability betrayal." Dad glanced at the service elevator. "You'd still choose them over family." I pressed the button. "I chose the people whose paychecks you risked." Dad had no answer left. Reena held the doors open and smiled. "This one still goes up." "So did I." "Would you have signed Clause 11 or walked away?" Comment your decision. Subscribe and stay for more family betrayals, hidden money, and clean revenge stories that deliver consequences every time.